Sword-swinging cats in a jungle, chrome robots in deep space. Two cartoons with nothing in common.
Thunder! 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 ThunderCats!
Except they're secretly the same show made by the same studio twice, a year apart, hoping you'd never notice. And that studio? It made something you've watched every Christmas of your life. SilverHawks is what they made instead, and it helped finish them. This is the real reason one studio killed TV's slickest space heroes on purpose. The original hit. To understand the copy, you need the original. In 1985, Rankin Bass released ThunderCats, a team of cat-like alien warriors led by a young lord named Lion-O, fleeing a dying world and fighting an ancient mummy sorcerer called Mum-Ra. It had a transformation, a battle cry,
ThunderCats! Hoo!
a rainbow of action figures, and a look slicker than almost anything else in syndication, because the animation was done by a serious Japanese studio, not a cheap assembly line. It was a monster hit. And in the toy cartoon business of the mid-1980s, a business my last video showed you was built entirely to sell plastic, a hit means one thing: do it again, immediately, bigger. So Rankin Bass asked the obvious question. We have a winning formula. We own it. Why invent a second formula and risk it failing when we can just take the one that already works and repaint it? And that decision, sensible, cynical, and completely logical, is exactly what doomed the show we're here to talk about. The same skeleton. Here's how identical the copy really was. This isn't inspired by, this is the same blueprint. SilverHawks, 1986.
90 seconds to breakfast.
A team of part metal, part human heroes, led by a hero named Quicksilver, defending the Limbo Galaxy from an escaped crime lord named Monstar, a villain who transforms into a bigger, armored monster, exactly the way Mum-Ra did. There's a kid character, there are animal companions, there's a rallying line. Partly metal, partly real, slotted into the same spot in the theme song where ThunderCats' Ho used to go.
That must be it. Hawk Haven. Home for the next few centuries.
Now go behind the camera, because that's where it gets undeniable. Same studio, Rankin Bass. Same animation house, Pacific Animation Corporation in Tokyo. Same composer, Bernard Hoffer. And the voices? Larry Kinney, who played Lion-O, plays Bluegrass. Earl Hammond, who voiced the villain Mum-Ra, voices the villain Monstar. Even the comic book spin-off came from the same publisher. This wasn't a new show. It was ThunderCats with the cats filed off and a coat of chrome sprayed on. And it was built that way on purpose. Why copy yourself? So why would a studio deliberately compete with its own hit? Why split your own audience down the middle? Because in the 1980s, a successful kids show wasn't a show. It was a toy catalog with a story wrapped around it. And the people funding these cartoons didn't think like artists. They thought like a factory that had just figured out how to stamp a profitable part. ThunderCats proved the machine worked. SilverHawks was the same machine run a second time, aimed at a slightly older shelf of the toy aisle. Space and robots instead of swords and sorcery. The logic was, we don't have to gamble on a new idea. We just rerun the proven one and collect twice. It's the same instinct that gives you 100 superhero sequels today. Lower risk, faster payday. But cartoons in this era didn't get a fair fight. They got dropped into a system with a stopwatch attached. A system that gave every new show exactly one chance to prove itself before it pulled the trigger. And to understand how SilverHawks died, you have to understand that stopwatch. 65 and done. Here's the number that runs this whole story. 65. Almost every first-run syndicated cartoon of the 1980s was made in batches of 65 episodes. And that number isn't random. 65 episodes is exactly 13 weeks of weekday afternoons, Monday through Friday, one full quarter, before you start rerunning them. So 65 wasn't a season, it was an audition. You got 13 weeks to prove kids would watch and, far more important, that kids would buy. Pass the audition and the studio orders another batch and another. Fail it and there is no second batch. Ever. This is the part the legends get wrong, so let me be straight with you. 65 episodes was not an automatic death sentence. ThunderCats started with 65 too, and because it passed the audition, it earned a second order, and a third, and a fourth, all the way up to 130 episodes across 4 years. SilverHawks got its 65. And then nothing. The audition existed, the clone simply flunked it. The question is why? And the answer starts with a toy that showed up to its own party a year late. The toy decides.
ThunderCats, please.
Burger King announces ThunderCats meal packs. Stage forward.
Never forget what these shows actually were. The cartoon was not the product. The cartoon was the commercial. The product was on the shelf at Toys R Us. Which means a toy cartoon lives or dies on one thing: do the toys move? Ratings barely mattered. Reviews didn't matter at all. The only scoreboard that counted was the one at the cash register. If the action figures sold, the show got renewed so it could sell more. If they didn't, the show was a failed ad campaign, and you cancel a failed ad campaign without sentiment. So the entire fate of SilverHawks rested on its toy line landing hard, fast, and at the same moment as the show, the way ThunderCats and its toys had hit together like a 1-2 punch. That is precisely what did not happen. Because the company that was supposed to make the SilverHawks toys looked at the deal and walked away. The toy vanished. The ThunderCats toys had been made by a company called LJN, and they'd sold like crazy. So the natural move was for LJN to make the SilverHawks toys too. At what was nearly the last minute, LJN passed. They took a look and decided not to do it. That left Rankin Bass with a toy-driven show and no toy maker. Kenner stepped in to rescue it, but stepping in late costs you. By the time Kenner got the SilverHawks line designed, manufactured, and onto shelves, it was 1987. Now line up the dates, because this is the whole tragedy in 2 numbers. The cartoon ran its first batch from September to December of 1986. The toys didn't arrive until 1987. The commercial finished airing before the product went on sale. When the toys finally did appear, they sold all right at first, and then, with no new episodes airing to feed the hype, sales collapsed fast. The 1-2 punch had become 2 punches thrown a year apart into the air, hitting nothing. Fighting its twin. And here's the wound the studio inflicted on itself, the one nobody at Rankin Bass seems to have seen coming. SilverHawks didn't just have to beat the other toy cartoons. It had to beat ThunderCats, its own older brother, made by the same people, sitting on the same toy shelf, competing for the same kids, same allowance. Put yourself in 1986. You're 9 years old. You already own ThunderCats figures. You already love that world. And now here's a second, very similar show asking you to start a brand new collection from scratch. Chrome robots that hit a lot of the same notes the cats already hit. A lot of kids looked at that and simply kept buying ThunderCats. Why start over for a copy? A clone can never beat its original at being the original. The most it can do is split the audience, take a slice of attention and a slice of shelf space that used to belong entirely to the first show. Rankin Bass didn't double their hit, they divided it. They built a competitor for themselves, and then acted surprised when it lost to themselves. No second order. So the audition results came in, and they were brutal in their simplicity. ThunderCats, toys flying off shelves, show renewed again and again. SilverHawks, a toy line that arrived late, peaked early, and faded before it could build the momentum the model demanded. There was no second order. The 65 episodes that ran in the fall of 1986 were all the SilverHawks that would ever exist. The show didn't get a finale, didn't get a send-off, didn't get a chance to grow the way ThunderCats had been allowed to grow. It just reached episode 65 and stopped, mid-stride, like a machine that someone unplugged at the wall. And the cruel thing is, and I want to be fair to it here, the show didn't deserve to die like that. Because underneath the cynical copy job, SilverHawks was actually pretty good. Watch it back today and the thing holds up better than it has any right to. The premise had a genuine hook. Heroes who'd given up parts of their own bodies replaced with metal to survive deep space and do the job. Partly metal, partly real. There's a melancholy in that idea that most toy cartoons never went near. The villains were a full criminal mob, each one a distinct, memorable design. A shapeshifter, a man with a buzzsaw, a robotic card shark. And the animation, courtesy of that same elite Tokyo studio, was some of the slickest in all of 1980s syndication. Quicksilver in flight still looks fantastic. This was not lazy work. The people drawing it and scoring it and voicing it were craftsmen at the top of their game. The laziness wasn't in the making, it was in the deciding. The choice, made in a boardroom, to spend all that craft on a copy instead of a creation. And rather than learn from that, the studio did the exact same thing one more time. Which is when the formula finally broke for good. Then came Sharks. In 1987, Rankin Bass ran the play a third time. They'd done Cats on Land. They'd done Robots in Space. Now they went under the sea. It was called Tiger Sharks, a team of heroes who transformed into half-human, half-marine animal hybrids fighting a villain in a faraway world with a kid and some sidekicks. If that sounds familiar, that's the entire point. It was the third pressing of the same record, and the grooves were worn flat. Tiger Sharks didn't even get a full audition. It limped out as part of a programming block, ran a couple dozen segments, and was gone by 1989. 3 shows, the same blueprint 3 times, each one a little less successful than the last. The studio had found a formula and then run it straight into the ground, and in doing so, had stopped being a studio that made things and become a studio that copied things. Which finally brings us to the question I planted at the very beginning. Who were these people? Because the answer reframes this entire story. Who made this? Rankin Bass. Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass. If you only know them from ThunderCats, you don't really know them at all. Because this is not some fly-by-night cartoon shop that cranked out toy commercials. This is one of the most beloved animation studios in the history of American television. You have watched their work. Your parents watched their work. Your kids have probably watched their work. And not one of you connected it to the chrome robots of the Limbo Galaxy. Stop and think about what these 2 men actually built before they ever touched a toy cartoon. Because once you know, the SilverHawks story stops being a fun bit of trivia about a clone and starts being something closer to a tragedy. The Christmas Kings. Rankin and Bass made the Christmas specials. The Christmas specials. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, 1964. Frosty the Snowman. Santa Claus is Coming to Town. The stop-motion classics, animated frame by painstaking frame, that have aired every single December for 60 years and are still airing right now. That's them. That's the same company. And it wasn't only Christmas. They made the animated The Hobbit in 1977. They made The Last Unicorn in 1982. A strange, gorgeous, genuinely beautiful film people still treasure. This was a studio that, at its best, made handcrafted, soulful, timeless things. Things built to last decades. So sit with the whole shape of it now. The studio that made the most enduring children's entertainment in American history. The stuff that becomes a family tradition, spent its final years strip mining a single hit into chrome clones for the toy aisle. SilverHawks wasn't a footnote in their career. It was very nearly the end of it. They ate themselves. Here's the timeline that should stop you cold. ThunderCats, 1985. SilverHawks, 1986. Tiger Sharks, 1987. And then in early 1987, right in the middle of that run, months after SilverHawks aired its last episode, Rankin/Bass shut down its production arm. These clones were the last things the studio meaningfully made. 60 years of holiday classics, of hobbits and unicorns, and the final chapter of that legacy was 3 increasingly tired copies of a single cartoon, made to sell action figures, the last of which flopped. The studio didn't go out on a Rudolph. It went out chasing a toy deal. The instinct that built SilverHawks, play it safe, copy the winner, milk the formula, is the same instinct that quietly hollowed the studio out from the inside until there was nothing original left to make. They didn't get killed by a network or a watchdog. They ate themselves. And the saddest detail of all isn't even about Rankin/Bass. It's about the artists in Tokyo who actually drew SilverHawks. The Ghibli fork. The studio that animated ThunderCats and SilverHawks was Pacific Animation Corporation, and where it came from is one of the great what-ifs in animation history. Pacific Animation was born from the ashes of an older Japanese studio called Topcraft, which went under in the mid-1980s. When Topcraft dissolved, its artists split into 2 groups. One group stayed and formed Pacific Animation, and spent the next few years drawing chrome robots for a dying American toy line. The other group walked out the door and founded a little studio of their own. They called it Studio Ghibli. Yes, that Ghibli. Miyazaki, My Neighbor Totoro, Spirited Away, some of the most revered animated films ever made. Same building, same moment, same talent pool. One fork led to Totoro. The other fork led to SilverHawks. And then, in 1988, Pacific Animation was bought up by Disney and absorbed entirely. The Clone Factory didn't just fail, it got swallowed whole. Never flew again. So here's where it all lands. SilverHawks didn't fail because it was bad. It was sleek, it was inventive, it was beautifully drawn. It failed because it was a copy, made on purpose by a studio that had decided copying was safer than creating. A clone can't beat its original. It can only split the family in 2. And when its toy maker bailed and the figure showed up a year after the cartoon had already burned out, The audition was lost before it began. But the real story was never just about one show. It was about what that choice represented. The men who once animated Rudolph by hand, frame by frame, ended their run mass-producing chrome knockoffs for a shelf at the toy store. And the show that was partly metal, partly real, turned out to be the perfect epitaph for the studio that made it. By the end, Rankin Bass was partly metal, partly real too. Half the soul that built the classics, half a machine stamping out copies until there was nothing left. The SilverHawks were heroes who gave up pieces of themselves to survive in space. So was the studio that made them. The difference is, the studio never made it home. If you grew up with Quicksilver and Monstar, if SilverHawks was your show, the one nobody else seems to remember, subscribe to Just Rewind and hype this video so it finds the others who do. And if you want the bigger story of how the whole toy cartoon machine took over your childhood, that's waiting for you in my last 2 videos. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.